Alleluia. Om Mani Padme Om. Allah Satnam.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony and Diversity. And today we're speaking with Siew-Fang Law. She's a senior lecturer, Peace Psychology, Victoria University. Thanks for coming back in again.
Thank you, Norm.
Now, in an earlier conversation, we were talking about the significance of water, and I noticed in your little potted history that you did some work on this with the significance of water in religions, but you've got some broader views on water as well. Give us a look into those.
Yeah, that's a really interesting encounter that being a researcher and academic in a university, I was given a chance to collaborate on a project, the Collaborative Research Network, that working with Deakin University and Victoria University, looking at this notion of, or the aspect of water, research in water. And a lot of researchers are engaging in these projects are water engineers, scientists, and policymakers. So I try to really understand what is my role if I'm interested in peace, in psychology and culture diversity, looking at this water. So I started a project interviewing about 10 spiritual leaders in Melbourne about what water means to them and what is these waters mean to them in Australia. A lot of these many of these spiritual leaders are migrants themselves, newly arrived from India, from Bangladesh, and from Middle East and Africa, and from Vietnam, and Catholic Church leaders, or Buddhist monk, to all kind of approach. So I'm really interested in whether culture and spirituality has shaped the way people understand water and the condition of water in Australia. So basically this interview about how important is water to you, and do you see what is purity of water means to you, and do you see, is there a crisis of water in Australia, and is water in Australia clean? Basically it's just basic questions. What I will really jump to the conclusion that we find out, what come out really fascinating is that the way they relate water, it's embodied, it's being. For example, the Buddhist monk was talking about how we are water. He said, I am water, I am made of most of it water. That water flowing make me happy, make me angry and boiling, and this is all metaphor of water that he used. And he said that disrespect to water is as if it's disrespect to ourselves.
Okay.
So therefore we use water wisely. And this transcends the policy's understanding of drought and control water behavior. Policymakers use incentive and disincentive to manage behavior. So you don't water the garden in the hot weather, or you don't flush too much water down the toilet. So there are a lot of that rules that telling us how to conserve or preserve water. Yet the spiritual approach to understanding water, it's more sustainable.
Yes.
If that start raining, that's the water policies are lifted, people go back to the way that we use water as is usual. We started to use a lot of water because it's just really relevant with the policies. But the spiritual approach is that regardless of droughts and rains and policies, people are more likely to use water in a more sustained and more consistent way, because this is really related to themselves.
So that's peace psychology, or lays a basis for a peace psychological pathway into peace with the environment. Is that
Absolutely.
How you use that?
Peace with nature, peace with environment, and peace with spirituality.
And so when you're in mediation with groups, do you find that, particularly with where Aboriginals are involved, would that be a significant pathway that you'd be able to use because of their direct connection with land and everything in it and on it?
I think it's so important that the mediator able to facilitate the session in a way that allow the disputant of all background to articulate what is important, what is meaningful to them. I think what is missing in a lot of sessions, not necessarily in mediation, but in media, even in social media, the dialogue and communication is lack the listening. It's everyone just wanted to put their view on, on top of each other. The loudest will speak.
That's right.
But I think it's really important to have a session where when one party was speaking and talk about why nature, for example, land is significant to them, water is significant to them this way, and the other side is listening. I think that is a transformative process.
Well, that would also be an important part of the training process for mediators. Is the art of listening a major training component? Yes.
Art of listening and also humility, I think, is really important, to be respectful of different perspectives that come across, that it may not make sense to us, but it's important to them.
And so by being able to draw the distinction between, and taking the case of water, the scientific perspective and the usage perspective, the water is there to be used, the water and the other is the water is there to be, and I am part of that being.
Absolutely.
That locks it into a peaceful component, if you can get people to embrace that.
You raised this absolutely important point. It's really about the paradigm that we're talking about. Sometimes the scientists have certain paradigm. The spiritual people have different paradigm, but they're not necessarily talking to each other. The psychological approach, psychologists have a role to play in bringing the science and spiritual together. And philosophy.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, it's linguistic as well as conceptual. And of course water, just finishing off on that, because we'll need to go to a break in a moment, but what I think it's we're 75% water ourselves, and most everything we look at has got water in some way or another with it. So we're in an environment of unity, whether we like it or not. We'll go to a break. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony University. We're speaking with Siew-Fang Law. She's a senior lecturer, peace psychology, University of Victoria. Well, peace psychology, it's not just local, it's international. Can you give us an idea? Because then into that comes national identities and all sorts of things. Must be quite complex.
Yeah, peace psychology is a sub-discipline of psychology. So a lot of people do not know about peace psychology. In Australia, for example, generally psychology students will know about neuropsychology, cognitive psychology, or counseling. It's like, what is peace psychology? Because it's an emerging field. It's a bit like community psychology or critical psychology. It's really evolved in responding to the lack of, in really addressing the gap. So peace psychology is not only present in Australia, but present in many different countries.
Yes.
There are master's program, PhD program for allowing students to study peace and peace studies, peace psychology in many different parts of the world. So that's a committee for a psychological study of peace who meet regularly, almost every second year, if not every year, in different parts of the world, to come together to engage in discussions in our work, in research, in practice, in education of peace psychology. So just recently, we just came back from South Africa, Johannesburg. Basically, understanding the role of psychology in building peace and addressing conflict and violence in a context where it still have plenty of issues that hasn't been resolved in Johannesburg, in racism,
Absolutely.
nationality, inequality. So in previous years we were in Malaysia, and then the previous other years we were in the Philippines, for example, Northern Ireland. So we really understand the issue of peace, conflict and violence in context.
Right.
And our members in peace psychologies are not only come from the dominant privileged groups. Well, generally in psychology, the field is quite dominated by Northern European, American, Canadian, even in Australia, the global North. The knowledge of psychology have long history by theories of European background. So in peace psychology, we're trying to looking at psychology from global South as well.
Okay.
So it's really again and looking at the epistemology and the worldview and the understanding of peace from a various or diverse perspective. I think this is a great contribution to peace psychology. So we do have lots of literature in peace psychology that public could have access to. For example, recently there's a book called Peace Psychology in Australia, and previously, I think a few years back, that we have Peace Psychology in Asia, and peace psychology in Europe, in Germany. So I think it's really important that you have that context specific of understanding peace, conflict and violence, rather than the universal model or template model of looking at peace and researching in this area.
That's right. And with research, though, it seems that if you're going to do that contextual work, which is critical, of course, is there any centre for actually doing research on the collated models, the collated lessons, the learnings from all of those different centres of conflict?
We have a group of people come together. So we don't call ourselves a center, but we have almost like a critical mass of peace psychology from different parts of the world. We form a committee and then we meet and then we publish our work. So we hope that our work will be shared widely through publication. So, for example, one of the most recent books is called Methodologies in Peace Psychology. That's called co-edited by Di Brethren and myself. So we're looking at a compilation of work that have done in how researchers who research not just the topic of peace, conflict and violence in psychology, but also reflect on our own methods of research that is also peaceful. To what extent that research that is ethical but is not peaceful. So we're really opening up that how researchers address power imbalance with participants. So how, to what extent researcher is not just a higher level, and how do we really bring that relationship to a more equal level with participants, co-create knowledge.
Without wanting to establish a hierarchy, but then asking you to do so, in the hierarchy of countries, etc. involved, it sounds as though, from your work, that we might be hovering up around in the higher area of interest and activity in it. Is that the correct perception?
Yes, very, very unfortunately, I think the system and structures that we're living in the 21st century, we have a lot of hierarchy in interest and agenda, where the highest agenda in many nations, in many systems, have been focusing on security, defense. So we've been looking at funding. There are a lot of funding has really been taken to really fund the area of anti-terrorism, security and defense. Yet a lot of peace-related work are given less attention. So peace psychology is similarly has a lesser of attention given by the system. However, it doesn't mean that our work is less influential or less important.
No, definitely
Similarly, with a lot of peace builders, people working in not-for-profit organization in community level are working very hard in making a difference, in making a change, creating social impact. this work doesn't mean they are less important,
No.
but they receive lesser funding and lesser attention than other form of
and you could be forgiven for saying that if peace psychology was operating at a more prominent level, perhaps the need for weapons and the need for warfare, the need for conflict would be minimised. So perhaps economically it might be a good idea.
We do also. Yeah.
Having said that, let's go to a break. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity. We're speaking with Siew-Fang Law, Senior Lecturer, Peace Psychology, Victoria University. Siew-Fang, earlier on, I think in the last segment, you mentioned something about a book that you and Diane Bretherton were doing, Methodology of Peace Psychology. Why did that come up? I know you're a researcher, I've got a fair idea, but tell us.
Di and I are both academic and researcher, and we're both passionate in peace psychology. And we attended a conference in Malaysia that was 3 years back. Again, this is a conference where a group of peace psychologists from different parts of the world gathered, exchange ideas and learn from each other in a context where we could learn from the local as well. So there are most of the presentation are absolutely fantastic, but we was really interested in particular one that is by our colleague Shahnaz Sufla from South Africa. She present her study that engaging young people in different parts of Africa in doing research together with the researcher, where the process is really transformative and empowering. The young people were given digital camera, then they're going around to take several pictures of places where they feel safe, places that they feel unsafe, and talk about those photographs. And then that is a method that is, in my view, it's very peaceful. And some of the outcomes is not necessarily just research publication. They have art exhibition of a photograph. And then as an outcome of the art exhibition, they brought the young people and policymakers and influential authority come along and then have a transformative effect of some of the places that young people identify as unsafe being removed and demolished, so to ensure safety. So I really like the method of that, how research is not necessarily just about collecting data and then report it for research publication and output. So Di and I came together to talk about if we have a book to compile all this fantastic work that actually address inequality, building peace in doing research, how researcher could be activists, how researcher could be practitioners, how research could actually address inequality through the work that we do, and what sort of book will look like. So we put together these books, methodologies in peace psychology, published by Springer's just this year, just 2 months ago, and 22 chapters. We have authors from different parts of the world and contributing to what is peaceful research look like. So some methods will look like photo voice, and the other chapters looking at community theater and drama, and how we can use different musics, for example. In other chapters, how do we use music, dramas, and photograph as research methods to engage participants in peace building.
The engagement of the participant is the key to that, isn't it? Because you can't build peace unless there's people there to build it.
Yeah,
So
you're quite right, because in traditional research methods, it's actually not too engaging with participants. So researcher tends to step back and observe. So we are not intervening, and researcher will take notes, field notes, or we will conduct a survey. So you fill in a form and then return it, and researcher will go back analyzing it. So the relationship with participant is more distant in the traditional way of doing research. So what we think is that peace psychology, peace researcher may need to think about to what extent, being researcher and academic, we address that imbalance. To what extent we can bring the relationship closer, but that doesn't compromise research.
No.
To what extent? Yeah. So this is quite a fun and empowering and amazing project.
It is an amazing project and very refreshing to as you say, for the researcher to convert from being in the back room with all the paperwork to actually bringing the knowledge that they've acquired out there and getting people to become involved in it. So you mentioned the South African experience, and there's plenty of opportunity to do that there. Where would be, the next most interesting of those projects? The South African was taking the photography and the safe places, etc. What other programs have you included in your book?
So, for example, we have one chapter contributed by Professor Tina Montiel of the Philippines, and she looked at the way young people, not young people, hold back, social media,
yes,
and how internet and social media could be a platform to build peace, and also a platform to conduct peace-related research.
Right.
Yeah, and so another example is take place in Australia, for example, in Melbourne, the community theatre. So we don't really have to go to South Africa or the Philippines, but in our own backyard, we do have a lot of context that we could really look at, and hopefully through research we can address some of these social structural issues.
And so it's a closed loop in a way, because when you're doing that, you are conducting data or collecting data for research with the people, with the activists. So it's this closed loop, whereas before it's in the back room and doesn't come back again. This is there actually on the ground generating the concepts, the enthusiasm for.
Yeah, and also that hopefully we wanted the outcome, the impact is also contribute back to the community.
Yeah. Yes, it's quite interesting. So, where do you plan to go from there? Is there any sort of logical outcome from that, putting that book together? Has it sort of put you on a particular path?
We hope the book will be used, for example, by researcher, practitioners, and students, as in particularly psychology students. We hope that more people could be more innovative about doing research. So thinking about how we can do research in a more peaceful way.
Doing research in a peaceful way, that's quite inspirational. Doing research in a peaceful way about peace, that's sort of another Look, it's been fantastic to speak with you, Siew-Fang, on this whole very, very important issue of peace psychology. And many people like myself would not have known about it before the beginning of these interviews. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Wonderful opportunity. You've been watching Harmony and Diversity. We'll be back next week. Bye for now.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allah.